Okay, so Hurricane Helene just slammed into the southeast, right? And it's not just the immediate damage, which is obviously awful. Over 160 lives lost.
Yeah.
Devastating floods. And get this, the Blue Ridge Mountains. Hammered. People go there to get away from hurricanes.
Yeah, totally unexpected.
Nobody could have predicted that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that really has me concerned. Can FEMA even afford to help everyone?
It's interesting you say that because the AP article you shared, it really throws us right into the thick of it. Over 150,000 households are already asking for help from FEMA, and like you said, this is just the beginning.
And that number is going to keep going up.
Almost certainly, which makes this funding question even more urgent.
Urgent might not even cut it, to be honest with you. Mayorkas is the Homeland Security Secretary.
Yeah.
He's basically saying FEMA might run out of money before hurricane season's even over.
Wow.
And he said this on Air Force One. Like, with that backdrop, you know it's serious.
Absolutely. I mean, that's not a budget meeting. That's a 5-alarm fire.
Right.
So Congress approved $20 billion.
$20 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, right?
You'd think so for FEMA's disaster relief fund, but
There's always a but.
there's a catch. That money's only good until December 20th.
December 20th.
Hurricane season keeps going till November 30th.
Oh, so they're cutting it close.
And those last few months, that's when things really get going, hurricane-wise.
So we could get another Helene, even worse, and FEMA's got an empty bank account.
Potentially, yeah. And here's the kicker. Congress, they're on recess until after the election.
Oh, so this December deadline, that's not just a date. It's like a political time bomb. Because some people are going to say, hey, we're past peak hurricane season. But on the ground, it's a different story.
Absolutely. And you've got these senators from the affected states, both Democrats and Republicans, urging Congress to come back early.
Yeah.
They're saying, look at North Carolina, look at the Blue Ridge Mountains. This isn't a normal hurricane season. We can't wait until after the election to deal with this.
So you've got this very real, very immediate crisis.
Yeah.
And then you've got, well, politics, which, as we know, moves at a glacial pace.
Yeah, and that's the heart of it, this clash between what needs to happen and what the system allows.
Right.
You've got Mike Johnson, the House Speaker. He's saying the funds are sufficient for now.
We're good.
Yeah, but those senators on the ground, they're painting a very different picture.
It's got to be so frustrating for people who've lost everything. They're just trying to rebuild their lives, and they're stuck in the middle of this political back and forth.
100%. And this is something we often forget when we talk about disaster funding, the human cost. These are families, real people dealing with an absolute nightmare, and they need help now, not in December, today.
Food, water, shelter.
The essentials.
Yeah.
And the clock is ticking.
It's easy to get lost in the numbers, right? 20 billion here, 150,000 households there.
Right.
But then you remember that every single one of those households, that's a family, people, maybe they lost everything.
Absolutely. And it really highlights the problem with just reacting to these disasters after they happen.
Yeah.
Throwing money at the problem, it helps in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution.
No, not at all.
This whole thing with FEMA, it should be a wake-up call. We need to be having serious conversations about how to be ready for these disasters before they happen.
Okay, so what does that look like? If we're not just throwing money at the problem after the fact, what are we doing?
Well, I think we need to look at how we're investing in infrastructure. Can we build things that are tougher, more resilient?
Like stronger buildings.
Exactly. Better flood control, things that can handle these stronger storms.
Right, because it's always better to be prepared than to try to fix things later.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical things either. We need to make sure our early warning systems are top-notch.
So people have more time to get out of harm's way.
Absolutely. Every second counts in a situation like Hurricane Helene.
And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because you've got some people saying FEMA has enough money, others saying it's a disaster waiting to happen. What if another hurricane hits before the election? Who gets helped?
It's a scary thought. And it shows how real this political gridlock is.
Yeah.
While politicians are debating, real people are suffering. And this isn't just a U.S. problem, by the way.
You're saying this is a global thing.
Oh, absolutely. Climate change is making these extreme weather events more common everywhere.
We're seeing it already.
Floods in Asia, wildfires in Europe, it's a global crisis.
It feels like everything is so fragile right now, like we're on the edge of something.
I think that's a really good way to put it. The old ways of doing things, they just aren't working anymore. We need a completely new approach.
But where do we even start? It feels so big.
It's definitely a challenge, but
it's a lot to process, right? Like we started with this very specific thing, FEMA running out of money, but then you zoom out and it's like, oh wow, this is way bigger.
It is bigger, but I think looking at FEMA, it shows us where the problems are in how we deal with disasters.
Right. So it's not just about, like, writing a bigger check after the next hurricane. What are we actually supposed to do differently?
Well, we keep talking about resilient infrastructure, and like you were saying, it's got to be more than just words, right? We need building codes that can handle these superstorms, invest in seawalls, natural barriers, things that protect our coasts. And the power grid, that's a big one. We can't have the lights going out every time there's a stiff
Yeah, we're
breeze.
still building for the storms of yesterday. When we know these future storms, they're going to be different.
Exactly. And beyond the bricks and mortar, we got to factor in the human side of this. How do we make preparing for disasters more of a community effort?
Okay, yeah, how do you even do that?
Think local training programs, neighborhood support systems, making sure that everyone, no matter their income or if they speak English, that everyone knows what to do when a disaster strikes.
So it's less about FEMA will save us and more about giving people the tools to be ready themselves, which, let's face it, makes even more sense if FEMA might be out of cash when the next hurricane hits.
That's right. And, this goes back to the whole debate in Washington. If we're doing more to be ready beforehand, it takes some pressure off FEMA.
It's almost like we need to completely flip how we think about this whole thing. Less reacting to disaster, more preparing for it.
Exactly. And honestly, that might be the most important thing we take away from this whole FEMA situation. The era of climate change, it demands a totally new way of thinking and acting.
Because we can't stop these disasters from happening, but we can be a lot smarter about how we deal with them.
Absolutely. The better prepared we are, the better we can handle whatever comes our way.
Well said. That's about all the time we have for today's deep dive, but man, we covered a lot. FEMA, disaster preparedness, the future of, well, everything.
It's been a great conversation, and I hope our listeners, they'll keep thinking about all of this even after the episode's over.
And if you're listening and you found this interesting, share it. Share it with a friend. Start a conversation. Because honestly, in a world that feels increasingly uncertain, knowledge and being prepared, that's what's going to help us get through it.
Couldn't agree more.
That's it for us. Thanks for tuning in to this deep dive.